Picture this: a man storming house after house, dragging men and women, believers, into the streets like prey. Blood on his hands, rage in his eyes. He's not just opposing the church, he's ravaging it, tearing it apart like a starving wolf. That man, his name was Saul, later Paul, and he wrote the book of Romans. Actually, he wrote a lot more than just the book of Romans. He wrote about 1/3 of the entire New Testament. But before we talk about what Paul says in Romans, we need to talk about who Paul was. Paul tells us something very specific about himself in Philippians chapter 3. He says he was of the tribe of Benjamin. That detail matters. In Genesis 49, when Jacob blesses his sons, he says something striking about Benjamin. He says, "Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil." Genesis 49:27. The image is not gentle, it's violent, it's predatory, relentless. Benjamin was known for ferocity. Israel's first king, Saul, came from this tribe, and Paul's Hebrew name was Saul. Now, listen carefully to how Luke describes Paul before his conversion. In Acts 8:3, Luke says, Saul, that is Paul, was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. Luke says Paul was ravaging the church. That word is lumai nomai in Greek. It's not a soft word at all. It's the kind of word used in the Greek for wild animals tearing flesh off the bone, lions, bears, predators in a frenzied bloodthirst. Luke is not saying Paul disagreed with Christians. He's actually saying Paul hunted them. And this is the man who wrote Romans and ended up being the most prolific New Testament author. Now, Romans starts to make sense. When Paul says, "None is righteous, no, not one," he's not speaking theoretically. When he says, "By works of the law, no human being will be justified," he's not speculating. Paul had the bloodline, the law, the zeal, the credentials, and it turned him into a wolf. Romans is not written by a man who failed at self-righteousness. It's written by a man who actually excelled at it and found it damnable. In Romans 3:21 through 24, Paul says, "But now the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law, although the law and the prophets bear witness to it. The righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ is for all who believe. For there is no distinction, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified by His grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. God did not reform the predator. God did not domesticate the wolf. God justified him." The righteousness Paul talks about in Romans is not earned righteousness. It is gifted righteousness. That's why Paul never says, "Jesus helped me become righteous." Rather, he says, "Jesus became my righteousness." And that's why Romans 8:1 is so unshakable. It says, "There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." If God can justify a man who ravaged the church like a wild, bloodthirsty animal, then justification is not fragile. It's not conditional. And it's not based on your performance. If salvation depends partly, even remotely, on your obedience, Paul should have been the last person God saved, because before being justified by Christ, his zeal for the law made him hostile to God, not pleasing to him at all. Grace isn't for the well-behaved. It's for the guilty, the hostile, the enemies of God. And if God can turn a ravenous wolf into a shepherd of the church, then no one is beyond the reach of his righteousness. Romans leaves us with one unavoidable conclusion. As summarized so well by Dr. Patrick Schreiner, he says, Jesus plus nothing really is everything.